Hello, everybody. Welcome to World Deaf Architects. My name is Michael Gallagher. This is seminar number 2, and this is called Mid-Career and Senior Professional Roundtable. We're going to have 3 panelists as part of this discussion who will talk about their experiences. And we've got some questions that we'll ask them, and they'll be able to explain their experiences. I just wanted to let the audience know that you are welcome if you have any questions in regards to a specific person or a specific topic. I will you just submit the question and I will answer, or I'll pose the question to the panelists. If the question is not part of the current topic or person that we're currently speaking to, then we will pose that question at the very end. So we'll have 5 questions for each panelist, and then we'll have time for a Q&A at the very beginning. But I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Derek Wendt, Mark Quinones, and Chris Hoffman. Hello, all panelists, welcome. Hello, hello. Wonderful, now we will get started. I would like you to start off by introducing yourself. Derek, if you could start with introducing yourself, where you're from, what university you went to, what's your profession in architecture, and how many years you've been in the field.
Hi, I'm Derek Wendt. I'm a project architect in Seattle, Washington. I have been in the architecture field for about 7 years. I was born in Michigan, and I was born profoundly deaf, and went in the oral deaf program in Michigan, and I speak Idaho Sign, and then I received a cochlear implant when I was 8 years old, and I was mainstreamed in middle school and high school, and went to University of Detroit Mercy for a Master of Architecture program. I graduated in 2011. It took me like 3 years to get into the architecture field after college. So I've been having a little struggle in the beginning of the career. So I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and started my architecture career in Minneapolis. Worked there for 5 years, and then I moved to Seattle almost 2 years ago, just right before the pandemic. So that's where I am at right now.
Wonderful, thank you, Derek. Mark, please introduce yourself. Yes, hi, this is Mark Quinones, and I was born profoundly deaf. I have a deaf brother as well, a deaf aunt, but I was raised oral, went to mainstream school until high school, and then I went to the University of Southern California, USC, to study architecture. I got a bachelor's, and then in, I believe, 1978, I'm an old guy here. I've been working since then, almost 40 years in the field. So total, I've worked for 5 different companies. And currently I work for the Navy. I just started that last year, but it seems just like yesterday. Time really flies these days. The first job that I got, it was in the field of apartments and homes. Then I focused on tract homes, offices. The third, I specialized in K-12 schools, school projects. And the fourth was also K-12 schools, those types of projects, and also auditorium, stadiums, that type of concept. And now I work for the Navy. I'm a design manager for the Navy in regards to renovations of new small buildings in different naval bases. So I focus currently on 2 bases.
Thank you, Mark. Now, Chris, could you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for welcoming to this panel. I am thrilled to share about myself. My name is Christopher Hoffman, born Ohio, Toledo, Ohio. I was hearing until I was 1 year old, and then I had meningitis and lost my hearing. My parents didn't have a lot of good exposure about deaf children, and they found a deaf school in New York, Long Island. So we moved, and I grew up in Long Island at a deaf school, a very small school, until high school. High school, I went to Eastern ISP. I When I was growing up, I loved Legos. I've always loved to tinker with Legos, even though I didn't understand that the background was really kind of like an architecture. So my hobby is planes. If I was hearing, I would probably have become a pilot. Building and the thoughts of that are really my passion. So I went to Guyot University at 1994, and I asked if they had an architecture program, and they said they didn't offer that. I'd have to do an online program. So I went to University of Maryland, or you could either go to University of Maryland or Catholic University of America, and I chose to go to CUA because it's a smaller scaled school in Washington, D.C., like Gallaudet University. I liked being able to have more one-on-one interaction. So I went to CUA at 1997 for a 5-year architecture program. I graduated and went into the master's program at CUA as well, and received my master's in architect in 2003. Meanwhile, I worked at a small architecture firm. First, I volunteered. I really needed to build my experience. It's challenging being a deaf person and trying to get experience. So I volunteered to build my resume and build my skill. I reached out to Robert Migos as a firm and got involved in a design competition and got honorable mention award, which is a wonderful experience. When I finished college, I looked for a job, and I worked in a small firm called Interspec, which focuses on interior design, interior architecture design. And I felt like that firm, I had capped out on the services that I wanted to build my knowledge with. I wanted to have more knowledge in different projects. So I applied to WBA, Windsea Baltic Association, WBA. I worked there for more than 8 years. And I have seen a lot of experience based off of them. They're a medium-sized firm that the principal architect retired and sold their firm, and another large nationwide firm purchased the firm. So there was a lot of impacts. There was some restructuring, some reorganizations, and some layoffs. But I got lucky, and I got to continue to work in internal architecture. I don't like the external shell. I like to focus on the internal buildings. And so I've worked in that for another 6 years. So I would say total, I've got probably about 12 years of working at a private firm. And then I applied at Guyot University to work on the campus, on-campus design plan. I joined in 2015, and I have worked there for 6 years. I just got promoted to the director of campus design planning.
Well, thank you, Chris. So, having we have 3 amazing experiences in different areas. We have California, DC, and Seattle represented, and everyone had a different upbringing. So I think we're ready to go ahead with the question and with some of the questions. So, you know, um, speaking of different roles in their office and what they do, um, and experience and motivation going forward, and that's what we're discussing right now. So now, of course, you know, entry level experience and how to get a job and to deal with some of the frustrations with that. Um, you know, you we're going to start with Derek, actually. Do you have any suggestions on how to deal with that, how to build networks?
It's a good question. I'm trying to reflect. Um, I think you just have to fight through it and just be optimistic about getting a, a job in the field, because there are some good people out there that would hire you, that don't care about who you are and just want to highlight the diversity and inclusion of the firm. There are firms out there that care about diversity, inclusion, and equity. So you gotta look out for those people or the firms that value DEI or diversity inclusion. It's took a while because there are people that are like a little nervous or scared to hire people like me, like with hard of hearing or disability or something like that. But you just gotta keep looking for the right people. That's the key. It's just gotta keep looking for the right people. Um, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Derek. Mark, would you like to share?
Yeah, so I mean, a long time ago, really, there wasn't, when I was coming in, there wasn't diversity, equity, inclusion issues like they have now. I'm assuming now the environment's much different, much better than the past. Like Derek was saying, being optimistic and going through frustrations is important. I mean, I had no experience before I got my first job. I mean, I worked with JPL. I did have 2 years of experience there, summer experience there. That didn't count because it was a different field. I was ready to give up, actually, but finally I did get my first job because the principal there already had experience with deaf students at their high school. They played on a basketball team that had a deaf player, so he was familiar with having a deaf person working with them. I mean, so really he hired me. So like Derek says, there's lots of people out there who have, exposure or experience with deaf culture and are willing to hire and take a chance on somebody and hire a person without experience. I would like to improve that situation by setting up an internship program for people to gain experience through summer internships, and that would help them get a job and lead to better opportunities. But at my time, it was very difficult. I was looking for 3 months or 4 months looking, and I was ready to give up until I finally found that job. And then from there on, that led to,
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. Chris, please share your experiences with us. Yes, absolutely. I think I think you're all right. You have to approach this with a positive attitude and be motivated. There are always going to be barriers and frustrations and limitations, but you have to continue to fight through those. When I was in grad school, I saw that they offered the program. There was a volunteer program to meet out of school requirements, and it was at the National Building Museum. They offered a summer program to teach their elementary school kids who would come and look up to architects. So I was involved in that program, and that was to really build up my networking experience and build up who I am. And myself as a deaf person, I'm proud of who I am. Even though I couldn't communicate with them by speaking to them, I could write and I could rely on an interpreter. But you're right that not everybody is willing to just hire a person who's deaf. They have to want to hire you and promote teamwork. And luckily, we relied on visual drawings, and that was part of our communication. Even though they were sitting right next to me, we'd look at drawings, and it's the same architect world, and that was how we would communicate, was through drawings. And it is a different world, and people have to be willing. back in the day, it was different than today. DEI is something new, but I think it is really important to have a positive attitude, be motivated to lead, to improve your skill and go out there and put yourself out there.
Thank you, Chris. So the next question, how how did you interview when you did you have challenges when you had your job interview? Um, we'll start with Derek. Like how did you, going through that experience, the job interview, did you use interpreters or what was that experience like?
Yeah. Um, yeah. To go back to the last question, I had two internships in college. One was a production design firm in Chicago. I got that job because my brother works there, so he got me uh, internship there because I was like looking for internship all over the United States, and I could not get anything. But that was like the first internship, and the second one was at Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida. Um, the the principal of the architecture firm in Disney, he needs to go to University of Michigan. So we had like a Michigan connection. That's why he hired, or that's why he called me because of that Michigan connection. But he didn't, I think he kind of acknowledged that I had a disability. Um, but we had a phone conversation. Um, I think he emailed me before to make sure if I can do a phone call or not, or if there's any other way I can or talk to them on the phone or over a visual call. We did have like Zoom like this right now. Like my internship was in 2010, so that's 10 years ago. So we didn't have visual call, and so we had a phone call. I mean that was fine for me. Um, I I have I don't really have any issues talking on the phone, but I hate talking on the phone. But I think having a Michigan connection helps, or having some kind of connection helps. Um, like having a brother give me a job, having someone, knowing someone give me a job, and um, I think over the years I've had like maybe 20 interviews at least. Um, I I prefer having one-on-one interview or having like in-person interview or like on Zoom call. Um, I hate having phone calls, but you can ask um, you can ask the hiring manager or the recruiter to accommodate whatever you're comfortable with. Um, I tend to ask like, can I do a visual call? Can I meet this person in person? And stuff like that. Um, I did not have any distributor or I did not have any um, services or something like that. Um, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Um, great story. Mark, what's your experience when it comes to interviews?
Yeah, so years ago in my time, there was no interpreting services, or it was very limited. So I would just go in person, and it was difficult. I was frustrated. I would have to lip read. One experience, I mean, like I said, I met a person who had some exposure to a deaf person. They were very articulate with me. They were very easy to lip read with. So I was able to do simultaneous communication, and they hired me. That was my job, my first job. And but let me share with you before that, when I was in high school, I was working for JPL in that summer program. And who interviewed, who did I bring with me to my interview? Was I brought my mom. I was like 16 at the time. So I brought my mom with me to my interview. Looking back, I'm like, it makes me feel funny to say that, but I brought my mom to interpret for me. So, I mean, I thank my mom for that support. Um, and the second job, um, you know, it was a referral from my first job. It was, a colleague, and when I moved, they told somebody to hire me, so it was a referral. That really helped with the second job. The third job, I interviewed again and I was able to lip read, and that was a positive. At the time, I had a lot of experience at that point, so it wasn't that hard to get the job. I fit perfectly for that particular position and the requirements. The fourth was through an office that had two partners. It was a split office, and one of the partners set up their own office. I contacted them and they hired me right there just because we both had a good working relationship and it was easy to ask for a job. And again, he was easy to lip read. He just was easy to communicate with, smooth talker, again, very articulate. And yeah, I mean, the last job with the Navy, that I used technology. I used, VR. I just use a video relay interpreter, and they hired me because, again, they were impressed with my experience. At that point, I had a lot of experience and skills. Right now, I mean, I think a lot of job interviews are using Zoom, and they're using technology. I mean, obviously because of COVID. My wife recently had a job interview, and she also used Zoom as well. My two daughters, they're grown, but they're experiencing the same thing. All of their job interviews are through Zoom. It's not in person anymore. So it's odd. I mean, that's just a new thing nowadays.
Thank you, Mark. Chris, what's your experience? This is Chris. Yes. So talking about the pandemic actually changed a lot, like Mark mentioned. When I applied to the small firm, I have to, I had to tell them that I was deaf and I need an interpreter, and I wanted to see if they were willing to offer an interpreter for the interview. And they were willing to get an interpreter, and I had my interview through an interpreter, which wasn't difficult. But then I got the job. And like I mentioned earlier, when I left there and I went to the medium-sized firm, it was the same thing. I informed them that I was deaf. I requested an interpreter, and they offered to bring an interpreter. But when I went to the medium-sized firm, they really it's a very recognized firm in DC. There's a wonderful reputation to that. So I expected high quality standards. And I brought my skills, my projects, and my resume. And the interpreter that they hired did not understand anything that I was explaining. It was actually awful. We had a communication breakdown. Internally, I was fuming. Externally, I was smiling, and I needed to just continue to show my best foot forward. When I left that interview, I was just so upset. I know that the interpreter didn't understand me. We didn't have that connection. I wish we could have been able to have a conversation prior to the interview to just make sure that we had a repertoire built up. And I do recommend that if you could do that, there's technical terms within every field that not all interpreters might understand. When I got home, I immediately emailed the person who interviewed me, and I asked them that I was unfortunately not happy with the interpreter, and I don't think that they understood what I said, and I would like to reschedule with a different interpreter. I explained everything to them. They were absolutely amenable to that, and we went ahead and set up another interview. I got a different interpreter. And it went very well. And I think it was important for me that I can't voice for myself. I can read lips a little bit, but I have to go through an interpreter, and I wanted to make sure that the language accuracy was equivalent to my terminology, and then I received that job.
Thank you, Chris. That was some rich information, and there's really just there's a whole variety of different ways to interview, and I appreciate all of the insight. And really looking at the different time and generational experiences compared to Mark's time compared to today. So next, I want to talk about your journey through your firm, and you guys have all had different experiences. Before you guys became project architects. If we could just start with Derek.
I became licensed just right before the pandemic. And I was working at a small residential firm that promoted me to a project architect just because it was like a 20-person firm. And I was able to, I had a really good background of skills and of experience because I was working at Alliance in Minneapolis. I was working there for over 3 years and doing like all kinds of architectural experience from design development to construction administration. So I was able to pick up all that skills in order to become a project architect. So I was able to show that as in my resume and in my skill, and they kind of promote me into project architects because I was qualified for that role. Even though the project architect means someone with over 10 years of experience, but it really depends on the firms. And I was saying the small firm that was, promote people that easily. Um, and I got a new job at via architecture in Seattle. They let me keep that role of project architect, and it's a long time coming. I've been in the field for 7 years, so I started out as a architectural designer, and it's just having like a knack to develop and grow and become more of a control of a project. I kind of like see the process grow from the site point to the construction administration. I like to see how it's developed on the drawings and then how it's construction on the field. I just enjoy seeing that process. That was something I was passionate to go that career path. And uh, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Derek. Mark, would you like to share how you became a project architect?
Yeah, so my first job was at a small firm. I was a designer. They gave me, lots of projects for me to design at the time, and I learned a lot from the beginning to the end of the project. I learned quite a bit through the process. Then they let me go. I was the last person to get let go. The second firm, I was limited compared to the first firm, but it enhanced my experience and my skills. I did learn from them. At that time, the second firm, I got my license. I think it was after 5 years of experience. I passed my exams. I had an oral interview. I got my license. With that license, I ended up being let go still. I looked for my third job, that particular position. I think it was a project architect position, and I applied for it and I got it. I really just thank the principal. They gave me that experience, even though I had no experience. I had lots of experience in background, but I didn't have that experience as a project architect. They gave me that job, and I had a wonderful time learning. The first few days, I was overwhelmed with the responsibilities. I was nervous, but I learned, and I worked through learning the ropes. And now I've got that experience. I've got lots of experience, and yeah, the rest is history. I mean, I've been a project architect, and now I'm a design manager as well.
Thank you, Mark. Chris, please share your experience. This is Chris speaking. So when I started with a small firm, I started as a designer, and that's what I started to learn from I learned the whole process. I didn't have the ability to go into the administration portion. Fortunately, the employer was willing to learn how to sign. And so I was able to work very close with them and learn a lot of experience from there. And I wanted to be able to learn the ins and outs of that. That helped me develop some confidence where I went to the medium-sized firm where there was so much staff and people were just thrown into different projects. Normally, when you work on a project, you have assignment to work within a team. Some Teams were not effective. They were not the best fit for me. You'd have to do the whole experience from the design all the way up to the construction document. I realized at that time that I found what my niche was, and I preferred the interior architects. So I joined the interior architect group in the same firm, and I worked with them. And once I started that position, I found my energy. The leadership was able to see my capability and my passion in this new group. So from design to construction, I was able to actually go on site and learn a lot from those experiences and really find my niche. And so I took my license during those times. I'll actually explain a little bit more about that on the next step. But I decided to shift the design board qualification cert or licensure, and that architecture and the InDesign architecture had a great collaboration within each other. I worked with a project architecture, and it gave me an opportunity to be a project architecture before I went to Guyot University. I worked with the I didn't have a license at basically. So it was great to have the learning experience and understanding from what a design looks like from a project manager, a design and overseer of construction. There's so many different fields and different hours that really are entailed in learning about all of this. In 19 years, I finally feel ready to take the next step in my career because of all of that experience.
Thank you, Chris. So then I want to hold the next question and just kind of jump a little bit. We talked about projects. So I kind of want to take a question that's related to projects. You know, I think that it's true for most people. It takes time to get those skills to get to that level. So Derek, you worked on lots of projects now. So can you share some of your experiences working on projects?
Yeah. I was working at Disney. That was basically in theme park hospitality. Working like Master Kingdom, Epcot, and like Parkwise property, like both docks, and try to make sure accessibilities are up to date, up to standards. So that was like walking around the restrooms, making sure the doors are wide enough, but doors are not too heavy to push. Making sure all that accessibility, like a very small little things all around the parks. And then my first architecture job in Minneapolis, that was like 3 years after college. That was like a small residential firm. They do multi-family and hospitality, like hotels and high-rise multi-family, like in 3-4 stories. That was a lot of residential, and I didn't really care for that because it's a lot of cookie cutter architecture. That's just in my opinion. Like I don't like working on copy paste projects. So I went to Alliance and worked in the aviation studio. They do airports all across the globe, and I was on the Minneapolis St. Paul Airport renovation project. So they renovate the entire main terminal, the ticketing hall, the package claim. So I was involved with a lot of aviation design. So that was a lot of interior work in that airport. And I was working in that team for 3 years. And then when I moved to Seattle, I started at a small residential firm that's similar to my first job. It's like multi-family projects, hospitality, hotels. Yeah, it's just and then I switched job to a bigger firm that specializes in transportation and transit design. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm looking at like a monorail station in downtown Seattle, and that light rail system that we have here I'm just like renovating the escalators and elevators for the train stations. And actually, I'm actually leaving my current job right now. I'm starting a new job in 2 weeks. Uh, um, a large firm called NBBJ. So I'll be working in interior architecture at that firm. I kind of miss the design first approach. That I don't know if you're familiar with that term, like design first approach is like when you have clients that care about design, a heavy high quality design process. Hey, I kind of miss being involved with that design process when I was in Minneapolis. So I just wanted to grow, to continue my career in design first approach. Um, that's, yeah, the kind of job I have right now is a little too engineer heavy. Um, that means you're working with civil engineer, mechanical engineer, structural engineer at the train station, and at the train station, there's not much of an architecture to it. So I kind of having more architecture, more design focus. So that's why I'm in the transition of changing jobs right now. So.
This is Michael. Thank you, Derek. Wow, lots of changes throughout your work career. Mark, would you like to share yours?
Yeah, so I mean, my first job was in a small firm. Most of the time at the time, I think it was about 5 people. It shifted between 5 and 11 based on the economy. Because it was small, I was able to do quote unquote everything. So I was able to do all that work from beginning to end, and that exposed me to a lot. That was really nice. And then the second job was more of a medium-sized firm, and I had communication problems because you know trying to use the phones in this giant firm, it was difficult. It wasn't as close. It wasn't as easy as my in communication as my first firm, but it was a good experience. I liked their philosophy, their design philosophy. It was good exposure for me. When I was done, the third job, I got that project architect experience. That's when, like I said, I learned a lot, and I was overwhelmed, but went through it, picked things up, and I noticed that being out in the field helped me learn a lot. So I encourage anybody just to get out in the field, learn construction, learn how they put everything together. I think that's really important because a lot of architects don't have that experience. They think that they're just working. They think that all the work is just the drawings. Really, I mean, the contractors can look at a drawing and say, no, you have to change the drawing. So, it minimizes change orders by doing things right the first time and knowing the processes. The fourth job was a similar experience. I had more and more responsibility. Also, more leadership experience. I would hire interpreters. The principal was great, was willing to pay for interpreters, out of their pocket for interpreters. Not many, but sometimes we would have them. Sometimes the principal and their wife, actually, they were both principals actually. They would go away for 6 weeks on vacation. They would leave the country, and they would actually just let me run the office, and that was pretty amazing. For 6 weeks running the office, it was just being able to shift hats and different roles. It was similar to a project manager. I'd have to delegate. There was no time just to focus myself on the project. It was all delegation, but it was a wonderful experience for me. And after 6 weeks, they would come back and shift to a different hat. Yeah, it was nice for me. It was nice to have that interpreter for running meetings. I couldn't lip read for 5 or 6 people in a meeting. One-on-one, it was fine. 2 people could be okay. 4, 5, 6, no, I would need to have an interpreter. And like Chris was saying, sometimes the interpreter wouldn't have the technical knowledge, technical terminology. They would flub. There's 2 different words. For example, drywall. Like rigid drywall. And the other word is dry well. which is, for example, like if you have an HVAC system, you have a condenser that will leak into a dry well, and that is a dry well, W-E-L-L, versus drywall. And the interpreter, I noticed the contractor would say dry well, and the interpreter would say dry wall. And I would have to correct the interpreter and say, no, dry well. The interpreter would say, no, they said dry well. And I would say, no, it's a dry well. And the interpreter then asked the contractor, did you say dry wall? And the contractor said, no, I said dry well. And then the interpreter would, realized that there's two different meanings. So now, I'm sorry.
So specifically, what type of projects were these?
Okay. So one of them, the first project was an apartment building, or apartment buildings, I should say. It was two to three stories, 40 to 50 units, 1 to 2 small commercial projects. The second project was more of a, it was almost like cookie cutter homes that were built, like copy paste, like Derek was saying, just different elevations, and was mostly working on that. Also, we did 2 or 3 office projects, commercial projects. The third job was mostly schools, K-12 schools. We had large clients. We called them quote unquote milking the cow, just because we had lots of contracts with them, with LAUSD, and that's Los Angeles Unified School District. It's actually one of the largest school districts in the country. So we had lots of contracts with them, and we provided services to them, and they were happy, repeat customers with us. And we would design entire campuses. So sometimes we would design one building, sometimes we would renovate buildings. It was really a huge variety of projects, and that was for the Los Angeles Unified School District. And then now we're doing lots of universities, post-secondary universities and colleges, higher education campuses. So track and field projects, classroom projects where we're building out classrooms. And now at the Navy, it's a very different focus. It's very different, and I could explain that later, actually. But that's my project experience.
Wonderful. Chris, please share your project experience. This is Chris speaking. So I've worked through several different types of project types. It could be very, very boring and very, very exciting. I think that we have to go through all of those ebbs and flows. As an architect, you have to learn different experiences, some office and commercial experiences, some recreational centers. It's fun because that's part of climbing wall and different things that you get to design for a rec center as a team. I also did some buildings. There was an older church in Alexandria, Virginia, an Old Town Alexandria. That church was affiliated with MEP, Mechanical Electric Plumbing Upgrade, and it's a historical building. So you have to make sure that you preserve history with the facade. And MEP engineers, they don't care about the facade. That's where the architecture has to step in and make sure that we understand the historical preservation of this old church. And so it's a lot of coordination. So we did some type of work like that. Also, higher education, small theaters, interior design spaces. So I would say within the 18 years of experience, I have worked over maybe 200 different projects, anything from small scale to large scale. When I worked in the medium-sized firm in about 2005, if I remember, it was 9/11. 9/11 impacted the economy, and that drastic day impacted the economy, and it was a ripple effect. Our architecture firm actually won a project with DoD. It's called BRAC 133 in Alexandria, Virginia. This was over $1 billion project, and we were lucky to be the architecture firm that was selected. And we worked through that economy crash, and we watched many people get laid off. And I was so fortunate to be able to be part of that massive project. But I was focused on the interior architecture from the basement, lower level, first floor, including services like the cafeteria, the gym, the bank, the lobby, security entrances, which is fascinating because after 9/11 was impacted, the security drastically increased. And so this was an anti-terrorism building, and we were working with that division. And so it was interesting that the type of security that they wanted, what type of barriers they wanted, and their method. And so we had a lot of coordination to work on the security efforts. And we needed to make sure that we had a secure path of travel from the parking lot all the way into the building. And then when I started to work at Gallaudet University, I did a lot of in-house design. I did researching for spaces because they got a grant and they needed a space to meet the needs of that. And so I was available to learn about the requirements of their research of space. So it was learning a lot about research space, also outdoor space. So I've had a variety of different experiences on all the different projects that I've worked on.
Thank you, Chris. So now, I mean, everyone has gone through the licensing process and procedures. Did you study? How did you prepare for licensure? Is there any advice you could share? Let's start with Derek.
When I started my first job in Minneapolis, I think I stopped undergone too early because I took 3 exams within the first year of my career, and I failed them all. I failed all 3, and I was like, okay, this is not working. I must be not studying correctly, and so I figured, because I would like read the forum online, and a lot of people are saying you have to experience your job first for a couple of years to understand the process from all different phases, like design development, the process management, the practice management, construction documents, and construction administration. You have to understand what it is, and in that process of learning those skills, they flip the AIE. I used to say AIE 4.0, and now they switch it to 5.0, which is a lot more. They ask questions that are more like real world questions. So it's a lot more applied practices to it, because 4.0 was a lot of memorization. I didn't like the memorization part of that. And then, after I think 4 years, I started the first AIE tests and I passed. And I was like looking at these questions, study for this exam, and doing practice quiz and tests. And all these questions are like coming back to me, like, oh, I've had this experience at the job, or I've had this experience in the field. So it makes it makes a lot more sense. Me, the question like, oh, I've experienced that. So I think having experience is the most important thing to have first before taking the exam. But that's just my approach. Like, I have to understand the process every day before taking out the question. I know there are some students that will pass this test right before their career, and it doesn't work for me. I think for me, I think having experience helps, understand the questions that you have on the exams.
Very interesting. Thank you. Mark, how did you prepare for tests?
Yeah, so in my time, it was very different. We didn't have the ARE. When I took my exam, it was 1985, and we didn't have the ARE 4.0. It was a different test, different name. The requirements were different. To qualify for the test, you had to have experience first. Now you don't have to, and that's nice. It encourages more people to get into the field. But in my time, you had to have at least 3 years of experience plus a college degree. So I had to gain the experience. I was ready at that point. And then when it was time to take the exam, when I became eligible, like I said, after 3 or 4 years experience, I decided to give up my my social life for 6 months, and I focused entirely on studying for the exam. And there were 7 parts to the exam at the time. And at the time of the exam, I passed it my first time taking it, and that was awesome. Now I have a social life with the license. I used books to study. That experience helps as well. Being able to compare, your academic experience with real world experience was helpful. One part that I thought that I did worse on was the structural component, but that was actually what I scored the highest on, was structural. So it was interesting. I know now, lots of students or those who want to become architects, they all have different needs, and they might prefer to take it before, and they're motivated to do that. And they might dedicate themselves to studying and taking the exam. Also, it's expensive. What I've heard is that the new exam is expensive. So they may take it 1 or 2 times instead of 1 or 2 parts instead of the whole thing. So it's just different compared to now. And also in my time, there were no computers at the time. Everything was paper and pen. Nowadays, it's all on the computer.
This is Michael here. Yes, absolutely. Chris, how did you prepare yourself? And this is Chris speaking. Yes, I would absolutely love to share that. I believe at that time, the ARE 4.0, when I finished the experienced hours that you had to have, I finished that requirement and I took it. And I think the first time I failed, and I couldn't understand why I spent so much time studying. I spent so much money on materials. And to be honest with you, where I lacked was the experience part. I realized I was lacking having enough experience. And I think that at the same time, when I was working in the field, I was missing the conversational pieces within the firm because I was just so focused, and I maybe didn't have an interpreter at the time. So I decided to take the test again, and I failed again. And I realized that's when AIA decided they were reformatting the test. And so I decided to take a pause and wait. And I'm actually preparing to take the test at some point. However, at that time, when I was going to get it, I needed to get a certification because of life safety in regards to code. So I took the National InDesign Council Board cert. I passed that. That way, I'm recognized to practice in the internal design space. For ARE, I feel like I could be ready to take it because I've had now 18 years of experience. And also very thankful for Guy University and giving me the experience of learning so many different types of projects. And I've also been able to have the communication access there and have hands-on with all these different types of experience that has really built up my confidence to take this licensure again.
Thank you, Chris. And you bring up the National Architectural.
It's National Architectural Registration Board.
And they've changed their rules, or changed the rules of the game, right? I mean, if you want to take the exam, you must go through the NCRB first, correct?
That is correct.
Can you explain that? Because I know that during my time, that was not a requirement.
Sure. So really encourage those who graduate from the School of Architecture with a professional degree immediately sign up for the NCARB, the AXP, which is the architectural experience, and you'll earn hours in different areas, project management, um, design phases, scheduling. There's different understandings of codes. There's lots of different categories within that. Fill those hours, earn those experiences, and work in those fields. It could be 3 years, it could be 5 years. It really just depends on your opportunity for learning. And once you complete all of those hours, those required number of hours, and you've satisfied that, then you'll get a letter from NCIB recognizing that you're able to then take the state licensure exam. And it really depends on what state you're in. Some states require, there's different requirements, which means you have to have specific numbers of hours here. For me, I followed the old hour requirement, and I was grandfathered in. But when you meet those number of hours and you take that test, they'll recognize that you've completed all of the experienced hours needed.
Thank you. So, I mean, those hours, do they trust you, or do you have to have some type of verification system in terms of documenting those hours?
Yes, so you have to actually have them verified through your employer, and they need to verify these hours are accurate. So I was with the same firm where I worked all of those hours, and I would do those hours and then have them fill in the paperwork. And I also did some within the community as well.
I see. So it seems like it's more centralized in terms of qualifications, and making sure that you can take the exam. Yeah, in my time, there were 3 letters of reference that were required, and that's what got me in. It didn't have a time requirement. And yeah, now there is that new board, and that is a change for today. I mean, to become a licensed architect, you need to go through that experience and what Chris has explained. So so now we're talking, we're all talking about AIA memberships. How do we become, how does becoming an AIA member help your licensure or support your license?
This is Derek speaking. I joined the AIA membership when I was in Disney because there was an AIA convention in Miami. And if you join the AIA, your first year, you get to go to the convention for free. So all my co-workers at Disney were going down to Miami for the convention. So I wanted to join along and see how that is. They are like telling me how great that is. Like convention is like a great experience. You get to see all the materials, vendors. You get to go like lectures, seminars. There's something that you can learn from. So I joined the AIA membership at that time, and I called that associate membership for years, and I became AIA after I got licensed. I mean, the value of having AIA is the recognition of being architecture career field, because it feels like it's easier to get a job if you're an AIA member. And it's just that's even though like it's really expensive to renew your membership every year, you're still paying for recognition. There's some like discounts for seminars, lectures. I haven't got another AIA convention since the Miami one. So it's really expensive to go on convention, even as an AIA member. So I don't really see value beyond being recognized at AIA. He could put the AIA and at the end of year signature. And that's a level like getting a job somewhere else, like because they recognize what AIA stands for. I think for me, it's like you're paying for that signature, AIA. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you, Derek. Mark?
So, I was fortunate to have my firm pay for my AIA membership because for their particular marketing purposes, it did look good in terms of, having key members of the team having an AIA membership, because that means you're following, codes of ethical conduct and standards. So it really was marketing for our firm. And plus they said, as Derek said, you'd go to the conference. I went to Los Angeles. I went to San Francisco alone for a conference. Got to meet some people. It was really neat. The workshops were nice. And at that time we had interpreters. That was nice. I did request interpreters through AIA, and they did provide interpreters at the conference. So that was nice. And what's even more nice now is the WDA has been set up. So you can go to these conferences and see other deaf members there for networking reasons. And that, has been established for the past 2-3 years. And that has been helpful. In terms of the value, it's that recognition of who you are and that you're a professional architect and that you follow these principles and these codes of ethics. And that you believe in practicing the correct and standardized architecture or architect. You're following standardized architecture standards. And yeah, I do see the value, and I would like to continue having, that affiliation with my profession. And also you do get discounts, you do get publications, magazines. And like I said, the connection to WDA is great.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. Now, Chris, you are an AIA member and you've continued that membership. Why do you value that? And this is Chris. I think it's valuable to have that for access purposes, for resources. When I worked in the different firms, fortunately, they covered that membership fee for us to keep us keep the resources available and the knowledge base available for us. It really depends on keep going. Okay, sorry about that. So some of the topics within webinars were very beneficial to be able to go and learn about in my career. And of course, getting the magazine. Now it's switched to electronic, but it helps to keep up to date with what new innovations are happening, what new technology is out there, and sharing new things. And you're able to see these different things and apply them to your own job. Things change, cultures change, and the pandemic has really changed too as well. And so this has provided valuable information. I think it's been very valuable to be a membership. And not only that, also I took a class in regards to an exam, and it was to practice for the exam, and they offered an interpreter. And so this was actually a local chapter for AIA, but they offered that. And I think it was a positive note for me. And they understood that the services were important for public and health and safety. I've taken the IDA, International Design Association membership as well. They focus in internal design, but both of those organizations, I have a membership for both of them. And I think it's nice to have the two different worlds and be aware.
Thank you, Chris. So next, do you have any suggestions or, challenging moments? Well, really, let's put these two questions together. So, have you guys gone through challenging moments or challenging projects that required, some creative solutions to get through? I'm curious whether, you have any experiences where you had to handle these types of, I don't know, crises or disruptions and have to fix a situation. So let's start with Derek.
Um, sorry, I'm just thinking about this. I think the challenging parts of being architects is the communication, because the architecture career is um, it's very heavy on communication. You have to like communicate with a lot of people, not just like yourself, your coworker, but you're communicating with the consultants, the engineers, the clients, your project manager, your there's a lot of tangible things around just one project. And sometimes it's really challenging to keep up to date on communication and making sure you're not missing key information or key details. And for me, I think I have thanks for the today's technology. When the pandemic is happening, my office has been using Slack, like a messaging software that we can message people, message your coworker on Slack, and having a visual call with them, like seeing the face, seeing my face. Um, I think that was, I like how that's changed, involved the office culture and making sure everyone can have a meaningful conversation with one-on-one, and having like a messenger to talk to people on the Slack or on a whatever message software you have. Just like ask a question. I kind of missed having like a one-on-one collaboration in Office, and Slack just kind of like replaced that. So I enjoy having continuing conversation with my coworker and asking questions that I have, making sure I'm up to date on communication. And I think it's uh, it's just stay up to date on the communication, like trying to find a way to communicate with your coworker and trying to find a way to make your life easier, to make your to keep your job or keep your job happy and keep your um, you know.
Thank you, Derek. So Mark, can you share, I don't know, your challenging experiences? Yeah, challenging experience or projects?
Any challenges or projects, challenges on projects that you had, or any challenges within the work field that you had?
Sure. I mean, you know, no project is perfect. You know, lots of things come up throughout projects. You know, in terms of design, you know, you'll have lots of obstacles. You'll find out that you have cost overruns or budget overruns. You'll have to meet and figure out ways to reduce cost overruns, or you might not meet a schedule because contractors aren't you know, meeting deadlines. So it's really important to coordinate and make sure everyone's on the same page. So really like big projects require teamwork. Yeah, I mean, I think that's about it.
Sure, wonderful. Thank you. Chris, share your experience. Chris,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah. I'm trying to think of the experiences that I've been through and the size of the projects. I would say big projects with big teams are a lot more challenging because of the communication aspect. When it comes to design building projects, I have learned a lot. It was very efficient, and luckily I was in a wonderful team that had to meet a very demanding schedule. Not meeting a schedule means you have to work those extra hours to finish this these schedules. And I remember I went to a very large meeting. It was a huge round table. There was no interpreter there. I was completely out of the loop, and that was challenging. I didn't know about any of the conversations that were going on. And I realized at that point, because the client was there, I didn't, I was on the team on the back end, and it really just depends on the size. But projects that you deal with on developers directly with, you have an email relationship, and then it's usually small meetings, but you don't always get interpreters. And so every situation is dependent. Each client is different. I had one, I had a few projects where I worked directly with the client, and again, budget's important, understanding the budget, asking for a budget, and making sure that you meet the budget. And sometimes when you are over budget, you have to figure out how to reduce the costs and fit within the budget means. Also, schedule and making sure you meet those deadlines. So it's very interesting. Some designs, you can give it over and you can look at the field and realize that this isn't going to work at all. So you have to understand how to be able to resolve everything to meet to the standards of the contract and the superintendent, and have those clear communications amongst each other. But yes, you'll always face challenges throughout the work field. Nothing is ever perfect, like Mark has mentioned.
Yeah, Chris, it seems, everybody has a similar experience with communication being a challenge. Feels like everyone's on the same page there, making sure that, for example, having budget goals and figuring out time and schedule goals. These are all common challenges for every project, depending on the size of the project. Certainly, that was a good point. So I do appreciate everybody's comments so far. So I wonder if we have any questions. Let me check. So it seems like at this point we have not had any questions come in. So I just want to thank the audience really for watching this seminar so far, and it's, I guess, time to wrap up this seminar. So this is seminar number 2, and before I close out, I just want to go ahead. I want to thank CSD, the Communication Service for the Deaf, for providing this webinar. It's been really great, and it's been very smooth. It's been nice to see everybody, and it's been nice to have the interpreters. I want to thank the interpreters so far. They've been very clear, and I want to thank also WDA for hosting this conference. I mean, most of all, I just want to thank the panelists as well for being here today, sharing their experience with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.